we're here to talk about what's next after MFA. What should we be thinking about in the security landscape? As I call it, wait, there's more. And a lot of this is related to many of our customers, especially our smaller non-compliant customers, move forward with MFA. And there's actually more to do than just enabling MFA. And that list keeps growing and growing. So this is to get you an idea of what's next, what should we be thinking about, and allow you guys to ask questions and get some answers. So I'm Eric Egolf. I'm the CEO at CIO Solutions, and with me is Jeff Franklin. He's one of our virtual chief information officers, or VCIO, at CIO Solutions. And Jeff will be commenting and maybe even adding more color in the real world for what we've seen with some of our customers. So we're going to kind of review current landscape, what's different, why, what's the issue with MFA alone, talk about some of our core policies that we use on the existing MFA or multi-factor. And a reminder, MFA is yet another acronym for multi-factor authentication. The concept that when you log in, you need to enter a code or use an app on your phone to approve the login. Talk about what we're seeing in the wild now, some real world examples that skirt past MFA, and then talk about what's next. What are we doing, and the immediate term, and then the longer term options as well, and some any key takeaways and Q&A at the end. So it used to be this case that you move forward with the solution, MFA is off, and then you move forward and MFA is now on, and the business feels way more secure, which it should, because MFA is foundational. But the challenge at this day and age is MFA is a generic term. The technical configuration of MFA matters and is always changing. In other words, how we implement MFA today is much different than we did 3 years ago, and is much different than we did 10 years ago. And so there's a misnomer that because you have MFA, your configuration is secure. And that may have been true or meeting best practices. And even if that was true just 2 years ago, new options exist. And this is kind of very different as we move to a world of Azure and Microsoft 365, in which there's an ever changing array of options to configure MFA. It's really actually quite a big product within the Microsoft ecosystem, and it's called conditional access technically. But how you configure it changes, the options change, and the things that used to be maybe too painful to configure become simpler, or the need becomes so great that you just have to deal with it. And so that's a lot of what we're going to talk about. So we talk about MFA, it's a generic term. We talked about this a little bit. You get 2 factors. First factor is your password. The next factor is something you have, or your phone, usually it goes to the phone number, text, password, email, biometrics. All those are second factors. And for most of our customers that are deeply in the Microsoft ecosystem, we use the Microsoft conditional access is what enforces the multi-factor authentication policies. And it is never a set it and forget it. It needs to be adjusted and evolved over time as the standards change and as your organization gets used to kind of the first wave, if you will. And unfortunately, it's a balance between, when does user adoption become just business as usual, and then how do we push forward with more security without interrupting the business process and operations. So why do we focus on MFA so much? The nature of all of our identities being online, typically through what's now called Entra ID, formerly Azure AD, means that you have to be more secure. They're no longer behind your firewall. They're out on the internet, and your corporate identities are probably the most insecure thing, or the thing you need to protect the most. And that has changed over the past 5 years as more and more customers have their email, maybe even files and other data online in the 365 ecosystem. It's just logical that we have to have a really secure gate around that. And that is what multi-factor is. In addition, many of us have moved some of our core business applications online, and it uses the same authentication. So in other words, if you have Salesforce or another application, it'll use your logins for Microsoft 365. And so protecting them protects all your other applications. It is the kind of the linchpin of securing your corporate identities. Is Microsoft Microsoft's MFA. Yep.
And I was just going to say, I would add too, we've also seen an uptick in, breaches with like these large corporate entities like Home Depot, Target, all these different websites where they have these large password collections that are pooled and sold. And I think that especially early on, there were a lot of employees or staff that would use the same passwords for everything, right? They have a password they like, they continuously use it, especially when we had password rotation being a more mandatory way of keeping people safe. If you're forcing somebody to change their password every 90 days, they're going to tend to use the same passwords. So
Yeah.
there's accessibility to try to crack these passwords by hitting things online, all these online services, and then also kind of the prevalence of this breach information being out there as well.
Yep. Yep. So just to review, we did a big push this in 2025 to try to get the bulk of our customers up to what we call MFA V3, and that's just our standard for what the recommendation is on our security policies. And so that includes things like a country blocking and travelers policy. In other words, if you have a user that needs access to your corporate data outside the US, they have to be put in this policy. And then there's a time period in which once they get back, we remove them. So really moving to only US people get it unless they're in this country blocking and travelers policy. And every customer has exceptions, but we want those to be explicit and in this policy. And we want to minimize the amount of people in this policy. So that's one standard thing that we've rolled out in our MFA v3. Another is in the earlier versions of MFA, you used to put the user in the policy. And so an administrative error or an account that was created and someone thinks it shouldn't be in the MFA policy, there's no easy way to audit that. We move forward with everyone is getting MFA unless an account is tagged outside of it. And that cuts down on human error for when accounts are created. So by default, every new account goes into MFA and only very selected fews, maybe there's a printer account that a printer scanner uses that has to be outside of MFA. And the third thing that we really highlighted was blocking legacy protocols. There's a whole bunch of insecure protocols that Microsoft allowed you to keep on, and just in case, just to make things simple and compatible, and moving forward with blocking all those protocols by default, unless there's a real strong use case, and in which case we make an exception for just that account.
So yeah, for like a copier or something like that is typically where we see it more often than not. Scanning email on an older copier.
So sort of like by default, everyone gets these policies, and then only with care do we have exclusions. So that's kind of a different model than was done in the past. And even Microsoft's first iteration of MFA, it was like a checkbox on users, and if you forgot the checkbox, they didn't get it. So this is a more secure and less prone to administrative mistake than before. And that's what we've been working with customers and pushing out this year, and we're pretty close to 100% of our customers using this baseline. But as I talked about, and this is the hard thing to kind of, or maybe not hard, but things that people don't like, is it's not a set it and forget it. There's new features and things that you can turn on within Microsoft to make yourself even more secure. And so what are we seeing in the wild, and what are the solutions coming down? That's what we're talking about next. In the wild, and we see this actually fairly frequently, is something called MFA token theft. And that is classically, you can think of a phishing email. So a user gets an email, they click on it, and the pop-up looks like their Microsoft login, just like it, exactly like it. The user wouldn't even know. They enter their credentials, and the bad guy both, and then actually on their phone, authenticate, and the bad guy steals the token and the credentials and now has access even with MFA. And there's all sorts of ways that this token theft can manifest. But the problem is that user account, with the bad guy with that user account now has a token that is valid for whatever the policy is, 7 days, 14 days, whatever that policy is, and can use that account to access data. So we see that token theft fairly frequently in the wild. Actually, it's not a thing of textbooks; it's a thing of reality. And 3 years ago, you were hearing about this in all the tech magazines, but we never really saw it, and we see it a lot now.
Yeah,
And so
usually it looks like somebody gets an email that says, Eric has shared a file with you, and there's a link in it that you click on. It takes you to an authentication page, which is a Microsoft authentication page that looks and feels legitimate if you've ever had a file shared with you before. And you click on it, you auth, and you're actually giving the threat actor that MFA authentication. There is a certain amount of time that that token is kept alive, so eventually the login will expire, typically. But yeah.
we've seen a case, this just happened a couple months ago, of a mobile device getting malware. And we hadn't historically seen this in the wild. And in that case, the threat actor kept stealing the token through the mobile device. So reset the password, user relogs in, and then wait a minute, all of a sudden we see a login from somewhere else in the US that's not that user. Luckily, with some of the tools in Microsoft, we could detect that, reset it, and eventually pinpoint how they were continuing to gain access. But that mobile device malware is not something we've had to protect against historically for most customers. So those are the two things: token theft and mobile devices as a way to get access to that token that we're seeing now. So what are the future security models and things we're looking at for our customers? Token protection is one, which we'll talk about. Device identity is another. Anomaly detection is the more advanced one that we're going to be probably moving to customers in the coming years. And then sort of the next gen one is something called ZTNA, or Zero Trust Network Access. And we'll walk through each of those. Before I do that, is there any questions in the audience?
I've been
monitoring it, Jeff?
I've been watching the Q&A. I don't see anything in there right now. But
this is a bad screenshot, but Microsoft recently added a token protection setting. And so we're trying to test this and see how viable. It only works for certain device and clients at this point. And so the fear is you turn it on and break some applications that are really important. And what this is doing is Microsoft is trying to see if the same token came from different devices, maybe we need to block it. And so Microsoft is starting to understand that this needs to be part of their general solution. So this is something that Microsoft is adding and we're currently experiencing, and likely will build its way into our next standard. But it's a global setting. We can't turn it off for a user. We can't turn it on. So it's kind of a scary thing in that we don't want to break that which the business needs to function. Device identity. So this is the concept, and it makes sense. It's like, I only want to allow logins for known devices. In other words, if CIO Solutions corporate knows that I have 100 devices, only allow a login if it's coming from that device. That works really well if all the computers are joined to Entra ID or Azure ID, which a lot of customers aren't there yet. But the idea is, in the MFA policy, you would establish device identity, and we do that at CIO Solutions. It has to be a known device that is registered. And this actually, when it's implemented well, is one of the things that is both more secure and more convenient for the user. And it leverages a technology called Windows Hello. So when I log into my computer and put my PIN in, my computer has a very unique signature that is registered within the Azure, and it makes sure that if I'm authenticating, that signature matches for my computer. And so it actually makes launching of other applications more seamless and pass through. And so we're going to be seeing a lot of customers actually want to move to this because it's both more secure and convenient. But your environment has to be 100% compatible, if you will.
Yeah. And I'm starting to talk to some of my customers about moving to it. And we have a couple customers that are doing it over time, meaning like if you build out the environment, you give it the ability for people to join. You can, as you're replacing computers, do the new ones in Entra and replace all the old ones, and then the project can kind of be a little bit more bite-sized. Also, if you set up this environment correctly, you can actually drive down your deployment time on workstation setups too, because there are certain things that you can automate in the Entra and Intune environment. But like Eric said, your environment needs to be compatible.
So this is great. It works really well for Windows-based devices, and it actually even works well for Macs. So we have people at our company, our CFO namely, uses a Mac.
I'm on a Mac.
And Jeff's on a Mac. And so this actually works really well with Mac, which historically hasn't been the case, but it does. The real challenge that we see is mobile devices are a bit more difficult, clunky, and there's HR implications. And so most of the time, the customers are making policies that just force it on the desktop and ignore mobile devices. To do it on mobile devices, you have to roll out a piece of software, which works pretty well once it's rolled out. But every user has to download this app, register their mobile device, which there's HR implications because a lot of customers still have employees that bring their own device. They're still not necessarily corporate assets. And so not only do you have to deal with the technology, which makes it a little harder, you also have to deal with the just the HR policy. And you can think of the use case in which, right now, if someone goes and gets an update on their mobile device and tries to transfer all the settings within AT&T or Verizon, now all of a sudden to get that device up and running, there's a call to corporate IT to make sure the device gets registered or a new protocol that they may not be used to. So this will be required in the coming years, but there's definitely kind of an operational cost or headache to implement. And then, as we pointed out, if you're not entirely on Entra ID, you can't really do this well unless you were going to move to like smart tokens, which for most businesses are overkill. So those are kind of the considerations for this device identity. Again, we'll probably be rolling it out as our standard and working with customers in the coming years to ensure that their MFA requires that third factor, that device identity. Anomaly detection or remediation. There's lots of ways to do this. We've talked about it, but this is the concept of I might not block you, but I want to know if something's weird, and we're going to check in on it as IT. And typically that would be done by a functional unit called a security operations center. And there's a bunch of different technologies at different price points for the robustness of this, but it's the classic example is the time traveler problem. User logs in from San Luis Obispo and then logs in from San Diego 5 minutes later. Is that legit? There's all sorts of other anomalies that are a little less logical from a non-IT perspective, but they're logging in from a VPN behind the NordVPN, or what's the other big one that a lot of people use to anonymize. So we can see things like, wait a minute, they're logging in from a weird place. Now, the problem with this is 9 out of 10 times it happens to be legit. It's like, oh, I left my VPN on by accident for my home use. And so there is an overhead because you have to look into each detection to find, it's actually probably more like, 99 out of 100. It's not
like we would see it every single day for all of our staff because CIO has our cloud hosted in a data center in Las Vegas. So simultaneously, I'm logged in San Luis Obispo and Las Vegas using the same credentials. And there are some things that you can do, like you can, in a lot of these apps, I can whitelist my data center as like a safe application so that it's not drawing correlations, like location correlation statistics against those two things. And some of these anomaly detection tools are smart enough using AI that they can even say, well, like Jeff logged in from SLO and from this other location in Las Vegas, but also these other 10 staff members at CIO are currently logged in from that location at Las Vegas. So it's likely that that's a safe location and therefore will be okay. And
so there's some tuning to try to tone down the noise, but inevitably you're going to have to look at to each of them because the anomalies are right. Their detection is not like the detection, it's a false positive. It is an anomalous behavior, but the reason for it turns out to be normal most of the time. And so you need to call the user, make sure you get them on the phone, authenticate that they're the real user, not a threat actor. So there's some operational just headaches that come from this, but this is a really good thing that we're going to be recommending more in the future. And what the industry is moving to is because 24/7 support and incident response is really hard. In other words, if an anomaly came in at midnight, can you reliably make a determination that it's not a risk? And so the systems, most of the advanced systems, allow it to auto disable the account, especially if it reaches some critical threshold. And that's a big change because it's saying if this happens to you, auto disable and force the user to call IT. Huge change for most organizations, especially compliance-driven organizations. But we are seeing that push down to small business, and eventually it will be the standard that if we detect an anomaly, disable, force the user to call IT, authenticate that it's the real person, and that's going to be coming, I would say, within 4 or 5 years at least. This will be a standard across 90% of small businesses. So that's kind of on the anomaly detection and remediation. systems, and we have a number of different options at different price points for that for customers. The next one is something you're starting to see in high compliance. Microsoft now actually has a solution as well that's been out for a year or two. We don't think it's yet there to make a strong recommendation, but it's something called Zero Trust Network Access. And you can think of it as more of an advanced VPN. Before you can access your applications, you have to establish a secure connection to the ZTNA provider. And then there's all sorts of policies and rules set forth there on what applications you're allowed or not to talk to. So it's been in the enterprise for a while. There's a vendor called Zscaler that is sort of the 1,000-pound gorilla, and Microsoft is trying to port down. So there's, it's kind of like what vendor will have a good price point, the right features for the small business, and be manageable enough to be worth it. So we're kind of watching this space closely over the coming years. But you're going to start seeing it more and more required in high compliance first, and then push down.
And we are a reseller for Zscaler, and we have worked through deployments before. It's a very, very complex system, has a ton of power. But we're really only seeing that for customers right now that are requiring it from a compliance perspective. So I'm excited about the Microsoft solution as well. And hopefully there's something it's not affordable right now for an SMB is the problem.
Yeah, and the current risk versus cost isn't there yet, but it will be. The risk will go up and the cost will go down. I mean, that's anything we see over time. So, and that's it. That's our presentation. So we'll take it over for questions and comments.
Yes, there should be a Q&A button at the top of your Teams window that you can open up and create a post if you want to, or create a question. I'm not seeing any right now.
Maybe if someone just posts a test one to make sure it's working. This is our first time using Microsoft Teams, not Zoom, for these webinars.
I mean, I did a test question. I think people should be able to do them too, but okay, we got a couple. So I got a test from Irene. Thank you, Irene. Appreciate you. So we got a question from Ken May. What are your thoughts on hardware tokens?
I mean, I think they're a great solution. They're obviously very secure. They can be a little bit cumbersome, and operationally you have to figure out how to register them, get them to the users, and with work from home and all of that, it's not as ideal unless you really need them from a compliance standpoint for most customers. But from a security perspective, yeah, they're fantastic. FIDO 2 or whatever works very well, very reliable. But there's just
I use one every day. So Eric mentioned for CIO, all of our devices have to be Entra enrolled, and joined to Intune. Well, because I use a Mac, I have a FIPS or FIDO key that goes in my Mac, and it's a USB it looks like a tiny flash drive. There's a good way to, I think, make a device that otherwise wouldn't be compliant. So if you have somebody that wants to use a Mac, or they've got an older Windows computer that doesn't support biometrics or Windows Hello because it doesn't have TP. I mean, everything that's running Windows 11 should do it at this point because they support TPM too. But it's a $60 thing to make a non-compliant computer compliant. But you do have to remember to bring it with you. If you go from your desktop to your laptop, you have to have two of them. There's some other things with that, right? But we can create a policy where you can say devices are joined or are, have a token of some kind.
So we got one from Tracy. Are all these standalone features? So I'll just go through this. Token protection is standalone and included. Again, this one breaks some legacy off. This is not yet recommended from our standpoint, but it probably will be. But that is standalone. In other words, it comes without any cost. It's just a setting. Device identity without any cost. It is a configuration, but your environment has to be compatible. Anomaly detection. We have a CrowdStrike solution here. There is a Microsoft solution that requires an advanced license, and then there is sort of a SIM XDR solution that we have as well, and they're kind of in that price order, but all of them at a cost. and this is not going to be free in the industry for a long time. So this anomaly detection will not likely be baked in without an additional uplift on licensing and management and monitoring of it. Honestly, the licensing is a lot separate from who gets the alerts, who gets contacted, how do we have, because if you're going to do this, you can't let the alert sit for 6 hours while the bad guy had access to your data. And ZTNA is certainly a licensable feature, more advanced, more expensive. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, so we've got a couple more here. Carrie asks, can you talk about CrowdStrike and where that is in your current security lineup? Is that considered advanced basic? Maybe you want to get an XDR as well.
Yeah. So, there's, CrowdStrike is a vendor. We've moved probably 95% of our client to the endpoint protection. It's called CrowdStrike EDR. It's a great solution for on the endpoints. There's another module that adds a cost called the identity protection module. That's very cost effective, and it probably gives you 70% of what the more advanced SIM XDR solutions have. And so that is a per user price, and we just enable that module on your account. We get to manage it in the same place. So that is the CrowdStrike IDP module. And then for more advanced customers, we look at SIM and XDR. CrowdStrike has one. It's a little bit more complex, but we're looking into whether that could be a good fit. And we have another solution from Adlumin on that SIM XDR stack for high security and compliance. And that handles log retention and anomaly detection across the whole environment very well. So the CrowdStrike identity piece that would do this, hey, someone logged in from 2 different places that they shouldn't, that is pretty cost effective for most accounts. And that's probably the best recommendation unless you're dealing with compliance. We may see the SIM XDR stuff become more prevalent for non-compliance in the coming years. And it may even be a requirement on security insurance, cyber security insurance.
And Eric, I know for a time we were providing that to all of our cloud customers as part of their service. Are we still doing that?
Yeah.
So Carrie, you already have IDP, the thing that he's talking about, is part of your CrowdStrike as a cloud customer of CIOs. And then I see some other people here that I know have it as add-ons, but it is a specific add-on. If you're a premise-based client, meaning you have your own servers and you're not CIO private cloud running Citrix in our data center, it's an add-on. If you're in our data center running in CIO private cloud, we added it for our entire domain, CIO solutions domain, which all of the computers authenticate against in our data center. So therefore we have it for all of those customers. And CrowdStrike does have a couple other add-on modules too, depending on what you're looking for. Like there's one called device control that makes it so that USB flash drives don't work, or only a very specific USB flash drive can work. They also have a file protection add-on too that can help with like DLP, but usually those are driven by, again, compliance, having compliance needs.
And taking a step back from this, we're probably going to do another webinar on this in the coming weeks or months. But big picture, what we think the industry is going to move to and ask for service providers is, can you audit my whole environment against an industry standard security framework? So, I mean, it's all easy to go in here and talk about MFA and here are your new options. But I think what customers ultimately want to know is, am I secure and am I using modern best practices? They don't just want a one-off answer that makes them more secure. They want to generally know, where do they stand, and can it be against an industry framework? And can I have a document that I can produce to someone that shows I'm meeting these requirements within reason across all of my technology, not just MFA? And so we're seeing the desire for a lot of small businesses to have, I'll call them compliance light audits that don't have the big price tag of a big compliance framework, but still are looking and auditing against an industry standard. And then they can know both where they stand, and they have documentation they can provide to their customers that they're secure business. And so we're going to see more and more of that. And that would flush out where your gaps are across the whole environment, because I think customers get overwhelmed trying to think of all these little things, but what they really want to know is, am I secure within reason? And can you prove, so that the people who are asking me of it, I can give them something? I think that's where our industry is going to go, as small businesses. And there's a bunch of different frameworks that allow that. And then those audits are a lot more cost effective than maybe some of the bigger compliance frameworks.
Yeah, with all of them, there's how heavy is the risk? What is the likelihood that it'll actually be, attacked? And then also, what is the cost to remediate? And all three of those things need to be part of the conversation. Because you could say that, oh, I'm running an old firmware on a wireless access point, but it's like, if in order for somebody to breach you, they need to be inside your building and have access to an IT closet, like what's the likelihood of that actually happening, right?
Yeah. So from a customer's perspective, the model shifts from, hey, Jeff Franklin or my VCIO, what do you have that makes me more secure? Which we have a lot, but it turns into, well, rather than do that, let's do an audit against the standard and find out where all your risks are and prioritize that way. And I think that's going to give the customers a lot more confidence that in this world with what feels like a million option is always changing, they get documentation against an industry standard, and then they can pick and choose which things they want to address. And so I think that's where the industry it has to move, because it's too overwhelming and it becomes too much of a salesman model to just say, increase this one knob here. Well, let's look at all the knobs and figure out the best ones together. I think that's the model we'll probably be moving to in the coming years. And yeah.
So there are three other questions. So Bill Peterson asks, more on Max and EntreJoin. How do you set that up without having a token? I could talk to that. So the way that CIO is doing it currently is we're using a FIPS or FIDO key, a little USB key. With Mac OS 14, which was Sonoma, they added the ability to do something called PSSO, which is the platform single sign-on, where a Mac can actually be EntreJoined to a Microsoft Enterprise account. So there is the ability to do an EntreJoined Mac at this point. When we went to that version of MFA and having the enrollment, it didn't exist. So we did it with FIPS and FIDO keys. But my next Mac, I'll probably try to do it that same way, as do the actual device enrollment. And I know you didn't ask about mobile devices, but also with iOS, like iPhone devices, you can do Intune MDM as well. So you can actually enroll the device in Intune using Apple Business Manager and the the Intune mobile device management section. I think that gets a little into the next question, which is from Dave Peters. What's the law around having employees use their personal phone to log into a company system? Do we have to offer a phone subsidy?
Yeah, Dave, I'd love to give you free legal advice on your HR issues and avoid you a fee. I would say, I would say check with your HR attorney on this one, because the devil is in the details about how much work you have to do, what do they need to do their job, and it's a little bit into employment law, not IT. I can say some companies do use stipends where they pay their employees stipends, and in exchange, there's some documentation that they sign that allows them to be corporate. Bring your own devices, but corporate software gets on there. I think the key is that eventually you would have to install an app, and you would have to let the end user know what you would or won't do it. Of course, what everyone's fear is, and this isn't actually how it's implemented, but everyone's fear, and rightfully so, is like Big Brother watching over my shoulder, my personal pictures, and all of those things. And so getting really clear on your policy, the technical implementation, and communicating that to your employees is kind of the best way. But you really do have that Big Brother feel when you move to it, even though that's not the intention. You're just trying to keep your data secure. So I think those things, you have the operational and cultural issues that you have to deal with as a leader, and then you have the employment law ramifications to make sure you're meeting that and don't get in trouble by accident.
And I've had this conversation a lot with customers. What I can say is most of my customers do one of two things. They either provide a company cell phone or a stipend for somebody to use their personal phone. I actually think it's cleaner to provide a company cell phone, because then it's your asset. And when the employee leaves, if you wipe that phone, like, you don't have to worry about data walking out the door, and you also have the ability to wipe that phone. If there's a termination or somebody quits or whatever. The other thing that a lot of my customers do is, if they have hourly employees or they have employees that they don't provide stipends for, they will set up what's called a trusted location, which means that you can only log into your Microsoft services from our office on our company assets. And the second factor in that case becomes the internet connection or the device that you're actually on at the office, instead of it being your cell phone. So I have a lot of like medical offices that'll do that for all of their hourly employees. And they can't work from home. They can't log in from their cell phone. They can't log in from their device at their house. It limits their ability to do that. But also, I think in California, there's some rules about like if somebody's working from home, technically you're supposed to pay them, even if they don't have overtime approved, and this and that. So some of my customers actually like it for that, because if the employees can't log in from home, then they can't log overtime hours for working from home. But that's just what I've heard from customers, not really any sort of legal advice. Um, the next one is from Davis. A few years back, CIO posted about security controls recommended by cyber liability insurers and industry compliance standards, and he's asking if there will be a refresh version of that list. I think
Yeah, that's a good idea, Davis. Yeah, I mean, and we can republish that for sure because it's changed and it is changing.
Mhm.
It is dependent on carrier. So it's like, how do we try to aggregate a general recommendation, but we would attempt to update it. Yeah, we haven't seen, I mean, the big one is the big one from a corporate cost standpoint is when do they require SIM XDR logging stuff? That's
Mhm.
kind of the next big one we've seen once or twice, not as
Mhm.
much. And the reason that's bigger is just because there tends to be a bigger cost per endpoint. That price keeps going down every year as more and more players are entering the market and more solutions are out there. But we can take a
Mhm.
look at that and try to update it with what we're seeing today for sure.
Yeah, I'm seeing more requirements around SIEM for firewall. I'm not really seeing requirements for SIEM on end user devices, except for CMMC, which we don't need to do until the end of 2027. But um, who knows what compliances will change?
Yeah, good question.
And I mean, we're using acronyms here just so everybody understands what we're talking about. An SIEM is it's an aggregation service where basically you configure the firewalls and the switches and the wireless access points, and you install an agent on all of the computers, and you tell Microsoft and all of these different services to send all of their logs to one place, and then that one place aggregates all of those logs, and it looks at correlations around those logs. Because right now we're talking about some of these anomaly detection softwares, and like we can look at the Microsoft ecosystem and we can say, okay, well, this person logged in his email from San Luis Obispo, and then they logged into a computer in Las Vegas, and those things are strange, and let's alert on that. But we're not really. Microsoft only has access to the information that Microsoft is authenticating against, right? So with an SIEM, you can do things like, well, they logged into a firewall from this, and they logged into QuickBooks from this, and they logged into a computer from here, and actually do
Cross
anomaly
correlation,
detection.
cross correlation, cross
Yeah,
system correlation.
across multiple systems, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So
So that's where the industry's trying to go. So it doesn't look like we have any other questions here. I would say if anybody does have questions that are things that weren't covered here, they want to talk further about AdLumen, some of these other services, talk to your VCIO. Some of the people here are my customer. You can, feel free to talk to me. If you don't know who well, you should know who your VCIO is. I doubt any customers would not know. And I think that everybody that's here is a current CIO customer. So
cool. Thanks everyone for joining and have a good rest of the
thanks, everybody.
day.